the terrible, scandalous Anne Boleyn, who supposedly dragged her own brother into bed, and her sweet, naive little sister, Mary. That's the story millions believed after watching The Other Boleyn Girl. But what if I told you almost none of it is true? Let's take this video as a chance to separate fact from fiction. It's been 17 years since The Other Boleyn Girl hit the screens. So, why am I making this video now after all this time? Well, first, because you asked me to. And second, because even after all these years, people still believe the nonsense they saw in that film. They still passionately hate Anne Boleyn, convinced she was this horrible, manipulative woman, all because of how she was portrayed on screen. So, just for you, I sacrificed the last scraps of my mental stability and rewatched that movie. Please give this video a like. I suffered for it. The film was based on the book of the same name by author Philippa Gregory, who, on her website, claims to be a historian and presents her work as a historical novel. I'd have far fewer complaints about all of this if it weren't being presented as something historically accurate. Because, let's face it, the moment people hear the word historian, a huge part of the audience just takes everything at face value. Since the film is about the Boleyn sisters, I suggest we start there. In the movie, Mary is portrayed as the younger sister and Anne as the elder. But in reality, it was the other way around. It's generally believed that Mary was born around the year 1500, while Anne was probably born in 1501. As I've already mentioned in a previous video, England at the time didn't have a consistent system for recording birth dates. So when it comes to Anne and Mary's actual ages, we're left piecing things together from indirect clues. For example, there's a letter Anne Boleyn wrote in French in 1514. Now, if Anne was born in 1501, she would have been around 13 or 14 when she wrote it, which makes perfect sense. But if you go with the 1507 theory, as some do, she would have been just 7 years old at the time. Let's be honest, it's far more likely that a teenage girl wrote a letter in fluent French than a 7-year-old child. In any case, the sisters were clearly very close in age, and they grew up together. In the film, the sisters are portrayed as total opposites, visually and emotionally. Anne is shown as dark-haired and dark-eyed, while Mary is the classic English rose, fair-haired, blue-eyed, soft-featured. They even suggest Mary got her looks from the Howard side of the family, since their mother was a Howard by birth. But in reality, we have no idea what Mary actually looked like. There's only one portrait that's even attributed to her, located in Hever Castle, and its authenticity is questionable at best. And of course, in the movie, their personalities are just as polarised. Mary is sweet, gentle, full of mercy. Anne, bitter, jealous, cruel, practically grinning every time her sister suffers. But again, we know very little about what Mary was actually like as a person. Still, there is one moment that might offer a small glimpse into how they were seen at court. During the Shrovetide festivities at York Place, in a performance called the Chateau Vert, Anne played the role of Perseverance, and Mary played Kindness. That casting choice may not tell us everything, but it certainly tells us something. But was Anne really as spiteful and hostile toward her sister as the film suggests? First, let me say this. I'm firmly against idealising any historical figure. They were human, just like us, with their strengths and flaws. It's clear that Anne was a woman who knew how to leave an impression. She could hold a conversation, charm a room, dance, play the lute. Basically, the Tudor version of a high school cheerleader. As one writer put it, for behaviours, manners, attire and tongue. She excelled them all. The way Anne defended herself at trial, the composure she showed at her execution, all of that speaks to a formidable personality. Historian David Starkey, one of the most prominent British voices on the Tudors, described her as a ruthless and effective politician. She wasn't content to just be a royal ornament. Soon after their marriage, Anne and Henry were planning renovations to Whitehall Palace and reimagining Hampton Court together. She was active, involved, and ambitious. But what often gets ignored, especially in film portrayals, is how deeply religious Anne actually was. She spent years at the court of Queen Claude of France, who was intensely pious. That's where Anne was first exposed to progressive religious ideas, which she later introduced to Henry. ideas that would ultimately help spark the English Reformation. Still, Anne definitely had her darker side. Her enemy, Eustace Chapuis, called her every name in the book, so he's not the most reliable source. But one quote of his does ring true. When the lady wants something, there is no one who dares contradict her, not even the king himself, because when he does not want to do what she wishes, she behaves like someone in a frenzy. And yes, Anne's treatment of Princess Mary, Henry's daughter by Catherine of Aragon, is often cited as a stain on her character. In 1533, when Mary refused to acknowledge Elizabeth as the rightful heir, Anne allegedly instructed Lady Shelton to give her a good banging on the ears, like the cursed bastard she was. So no, Anne wasn't a saint. But my biggest issue with the film is that it reduces her to a power-hungry villain, a jealous sister, and nothing more. The real Anne Boleyn was far more complex, not perfect, but certainly not flat. But what do we actually know about the real relationship between the Boleyn sisters? How much were they actually present in each other's lives? Well, their connection seems to have happened more in fragments than in full chapters. Their paths began to diverge as early as when Anne was sent to the court of Margaret of Austria. Later, in 1514, both sisters accompanied Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, to France for her marriage to King Louis XII. So, no, as the film suggests, Anne wasn't banished to France as punishment. She and Mary went there together, and it was considered an honour, not a penalty. After the French king died, Mary likely began an affair with the new king, Francis I, but soon returned to England with the rest of Mary Tudor's entourage. Anne, however, remained in France, and the sisters wouldn't see each other again for 6 years. At some point after Mary's return to England, she became Henry VIII's mistress. The exact timing is unclear, but it likely happened between 1515 and 1526/27. We do know the affair took place because Henry later sought permission to marry Anne and admitted he had previously had carnal relations with one of her relatives, almost certainly referring to Mary. Did Mary have children by the king? Well, for starters, her first child was a girl, not a boy, as shown in the series. That daughter, Catherine Carey, is actually the reason the Boleyn bloodline still connects to the modern British royal family. Her second child, though, was a boy named Henry, and contemporary sources described him as having the same red hair as Henry VIII himself. Still, the king never acknowledged either child as his. Personally, I don't believe those children were the king's. Because if Henry had truly fathered a son, he almost certainly would have acknowledged him, especially considering how obsessed he was with securing a male heir. Just look at the case of Henry Fitzroy, an illegitimate son by Bessie Blount, whom Henry not only acknowledged but gave titles, lands, and even considered naming as his successor at one point. So the idea that he would quietly ignore a son by Mary Boleyn doesn't quite add up. Interestingly, after Mary was widowed, Anne took custody of her son. This is often painted as some kind of heartless power move, as if Anne stole the child. But in reality, it gave him access to a high-level education and elite connections. So if anything, Anne gave him a future. Now, what did the sisters really think about the fact that they had both shared the same man? We don't know. There's no evidence of rivalry or dramatic arguments about it. Nothing like what the film suggests. But it's fairly clear that Anne learned something from her Mary's example. Being the king's mistress came with attention, yes, but not lasting power. And Anne didn't want to end up as just another forgotten name on Henry's list. We do know that Mary was present at Anne's coronation, and she even accompanied her to Calais, but she wasn't one of Anne's regular ladies-in-waiting. Then, in September 1534, Mary was banished from court after marrying a man without the royal family's approval. She would never see Anne again. There were no dramatic pleas to the king, no letters begging forgiveness. Nothing like that. Mary appears to have disappeared from court life, even during the final chaotic months of her sister's downfall. And no, she absolutely did not raise Elizabeth. That's one of the most bizarre inventions in the film. In fact, we don't even know if Mary ever saw her niece again before her own death in 1543. So, to be honest, I don't get the sense that these sisters were all that close. Not in the way the movie wants us to believe. But what do you think? Were they distant? Were they once close and simply drifted apart? Let me know in the comments. To me, this film didn't really reveal anything about Mary Boleyn as a person. All it really did was undress Scarlett Johansson for the bedroom scenes, her education, her life in France, her willingness to risk everything for genuine love. All of that was pushed to the sidelines. The film that supposedly set out to tell her story ended up just making one up instead. We've given the Tudors series a fair amount of criticism, and rightfully so. But compared to the Other Boleyn Girl, that show looks almost as accurate as a history textbook. The problem with the film is that the timeline of the Boleyn sisters' lives is completely scrambled, and entire years of events are awkwardly crammed into the final 20 minutes. But, of course, the biggest issue lies in the invented and distorted facts. If you'd like me to break down all the inaccuracies in how the film portrays Anne's relationship with Henry, and take a closer look at the allegations involving her and her brother, let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, tell me what you thought of this film. See you in the next video.